talk. Next up, we've got Izabella Kaminska.
I've got some slides, so will that microphone work?
It should do.
Just because I tend to wave my hands around. Okay. Hello, is it working? Can you hear me? Okay. So everyone's, 10 minutes tends to extend, so you've got a choice now. You can have the long version or the short version. Hands up for the long version. It does have slides, and there will be a picture of Star Trek at the end. Okay? If not, short version, I can sum it up very quickly. Okay, let's go for the, I'll try. I'll wind things up if it gets too long. So I'm a communicator, I'm a journalist, I work for the FT. I write for FT Alphaville blog. And I do always, I always start off these things when I'm asked to do them with thanking everybody for inviting me in the first place, and then asking them why, because at the end of the day, I'm a journalist, I'm not an expert, I'm a communicator at best, and if I bring any value, it's because I spend my day researching, reading, and speaking to people who are experts. But luckily enough, I was fortunate to be trained by the FT recently in public speaking, and they told me not to do this sort of self-effacing start. So apparently people determine whether you're going to be a good speaker or not within the first 2 minutes or less. So you have to do a very good sort of, don't undersell yourself, you have to oversell yourself and then underdeliver. And interestingly enough, the guy who told me that was a kind of corporate PR type who was brought in by the FT. Usually he spends his day training the corporate sector how to deal with the media, but in this case he was, training me on how to deliver myself to you guys. And I just thought that was a very corporate kind of thing to say. But I'm self-effacing, so I probably will underdeliver, sorry. And if I stutter, it's because I'm a bit nervous. So anyway, he did say to keep the attention of the room, you have to come up with a big foyer, discussion point. So my slides are not moving. Ah. Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. I see. So what is my big foyer thought? Well, it is basically that the big dark secret is the system, as it stands, depends on information asymmetry. That is what creates value in our modern day. Well, that's what I'm going to argue in any case. And information asymmetry, what is that? Basically deception, exploitation, extortion, all those lovely things. And crises, in my opinion, like from all this reading that I've been doing, and I'm a historian as well, they come about whenever there's a rebalancing of the information asymmetry. So, for example, inflation crises, in my opinion, that's what happens when honest folk realize they've been taken advantage of and demand an extra share of everything, and as a result there's suddenly a shortage. Deflation crises, on the other hand, happen when the rentiers, the pirates, the people who really, get value for nothing, when they realize they've been defrauded by the honest people, because the honest people are turning out to be a little bit more profitable than they realize, and effectively put a gun to the system's head and say, actually, we'd like to have a bigger tribute, please. And I call them pirates because it really does historically go back all the way to ancient history, to Pompey the Great, dealing with the pirates and how they dealt with tribute extortion attempts. Sort of mafia stuff, if you think about it. So I'm going to make this argument simply by saying, very quickly, something is rotten at the heart of online information exchange. It's down to two-sided markets, which is very relevant these days because Jean Tirole just won the Nobel. Itself, and obscurity is the key thing here. Then I'm going to say it's all down to the cocktail trap, which I'll explain in a bit. And only at the end do you realize the power of the dark inventory. Which is, I've put that in because I was asked to kind of tie social media with my stuff about dark inventory, which turned out to be quite a big loop, but let's hope I can do it. So, I've missed a slide. There we go. So who serves capital? I propose it's those who choose to give capital a platform in the first place. And this is especially important in the technology age, because we've heard about land value, we've heard about banks, liquidity, but nobody's talking about technology and how this is disrupting value. And this for me, it's all about context. So if you, basically what I'm trying to say is you feel deprived only if you can't have something you want, irrespective of whether you need it or not. On the flip side, you only feel empowered if you've got something other people want and they don't have. If you see what I mean, what I'm getting at is it's a situation that ends up diverting capital to, and by capital I mean energy and resources, to servicing manipulated wants for all sorts of what I call cult market value, from Devil Wears Prada to Beanie Babies to all sorts of kind of like brand focused stuff, rather than allocating those resources to people who still need that stuff. So capital and information could be allocated to giving everyone the means to access the stuff they need. But at the moment, we're in this weird world because there's an effective supply glut. There's an output gap, which means there's more stuff than there is really money to chase it. So we're creating artificial wants to maintain the hierarchy. The kind of it's an illusion of value in many respects, because if we were to just give away stuff for free to all the people who need it, that would undermine value itself in the capital system. So how do you persuade people to divert resources to satisfying new wants rather than spreading, wealth to where it's needed? Well, you have to influence information flow. And this is a quote from Chomsky and Herman, who wrote Manufacturing Consent. And that's what I'm going to argue. It's all about manufacturing consent. We want to create a subservient audience that will do our bidding. And the best way to do that is to make them realize that, to make them not realize that their choices are not their own. And this is where we, the media, really come into play, because we are conduit, excuse me, I've got a cold. We're a conduit for these messages. And media, I'm not trying to, you might say, well, she's at the FT, she's an apologist for the standing system. Well, I don't think that's what I'm trying. I am a little bit, of course. But what I would argue is that things really fell apart as soon as advertising came into the game. As soon as journalists had to be, were not being paid for their work on a price basis for the work they put in, but via sort of the messages they carried in the platforms that were providing those messages, that's when we entered a sort of dangerous race to the bottom. And in the old media model, it was never perfect. And of course, things could be subsidized by special interests, whether they were media barons, or in the case of Reuters, say, information distribution via, financial terminals, or it could be more overt advertising, slap bang in the middle of page 3 or wherever. But there was a sort of peripheral invasion of that advertising. It was only, you could disregard it. There was a barrier. There was supposed to be a barrier between church and state. And obviously some of us in the media industry did not, defend that barrier very well, but we did try. And there were some ethics that we all upheld. There was a PCC code. We really did try. But then what happened with advertising is that the free market does not yield, as he said, does not yield a neutral system in which final buyer choice decides. The advertiser's choice influenced media prosperity and survival. And this obviously just got even worse with the digital age, because what you ended up with is this freemium model. And the truth is, if something's free, it's probably not free. You're paying for it in some other way. It's the classic two-sided market situation. It's free because you're probably being manipulated. And that's really where we are now. That's a quote from Marshall McLuhan. How many of you are familiar with his work? So he was very well known in the 1960s. If you ever watch Annie Hall, he makes a kind of cameo appearance in there. And he was like a media communications guru. And he was saying really profound stuff back then. Nobody understood what the hell he was talking about. And suddenly, what he's saying really makes sense. So what he warned us back in the 1960s was that the more the data banks record about each one of us, the less we exist. Kind of profound, but really, really true. Because what he's saying is, it doesn't matter if you get all those things that you want, if the reason you wanted them is, basically someone's manipulated you into thinking you want them. So the choices you're making are not really your own. So, the spin side of that is, does it really matter? Does it matter as long as you're happy? Does it matter if your choices are not your own? I would argue it does, because it's the difference between being in a deterministic world or in a world where you have some free will. And I'm nearly done, I promise. Okay, which brings me to the cocktail trap. But before I get to the cocktail, okay, I'm going to skip here. So I argue very, I'm just saying that social media, it was supposed to empower us. And in a way, it really did for a while. We allowed access to almost anybody. And suddenly you had Joe Blogs being able to tackle, Paul Krugman and well, he doesn't tweet, but you know what I mean. And there was suddenly some sort of, real Habermas public sphere where we all seem to have a dialogue. But this is no more. That was the case maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But now the PRs have figured out how to manipulate us through social media. So you're just getting out, not only is there terrible news sprawl, not only do the countless organizations that have been created have a much less reliable track record for splitting church and state, not only, on top of all this, as Marshall said, the medium is the message, and in the digital space, the actual space does not lend itself to serendipity, peripheral sort of influence. Therefore, annoying apps